Hello, everybody. Good to see you this week again. Great pleasure, especially at this time, an hour earlier. So it will be easier for all of us, I hope. Thank you very much, Geshe, for teaching us this precious text. We are so fortunate to be able to study it. This is the 63rd session, I think, and we appreciate it so very much. For all of us, all of you, if you want to listen to the teachings, it's all in our website, either recording videos or YouTube. So it's very recommended to see it again. Not so easy, but very beneficial for all of us. So please make use of these tools. And again and again, if you have questions, please send them to Delete, where we can all benefit from each and every question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leora. Sorry, I did not mute myself. It may be that a lot of people, well, maybe don't have time around this time. A few people less than usual, or it's still difficult with the change of time, but let's start anyway. As usual, with, of course, a short meditation. And as usual, we'll do a little bit of breathing meditation just to focus the mind. And now in the space in front of you, visualize your Lama manifesting in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni, wearing the saffron robes of a fully ordained monk. And being a manifestation of omniscience and great love, great compassion. And similarly, our Lama manifests in the form of the great masters, the different traditions all around the Buddha, Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Chandakirti, and the other Nalanda masters, all appearing in the space in front of you. in essence being your spiritual Lama, your spiritual teacher. And similarly, think that all the great masters from Tibet, but also from the Pali tradition, the masters of China, Vietnam, and so forth, all appear as inseparable from your Lama. As our objects of refuge, as inspiration and guidance. Looking after us with love, compassion. And of course, the teachings. And the merit field is then surrounded, we ourselves and the merit field, all surrounded by mother sentient beings. Quietly surrounding us. And all the same in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. And due to their rude ignorance, experience uncontrollably different afflictive emotions that give rise to the various types of suffering. Through remembering that they're just like us. Generate a sense of affection, acceptance, and closeness. That is affectionate love towards all sentient beings, without exception. So that there's no difference, sense of closeness towards the others and the I. There's no difference, equally close. Equally important. And then become aware of many types of sufferings, problems, mental and physical pain, anxiety, depression, and so on. And generate the most sincere aspiration. May each one of those sentient beings surrounding us, all of them, may they be free from all their suffering and its causes. And may I be able to help them to remove that suffering and its cause. Fill your heart with love, the deepest compassion, wish to be able to free all sentient beings from suffering and its causes. And then your compassion grows stronger. This wish giving rise to the determination, that is, to the special altruistic attitude that is determined. I'll do whatever I can, whatever needs to be done to remove the suffering and its causes from the mind of sentient beings. And that determination then gives way to the mind of enlightenment. Again, the aspiration or determination to become fully enlightened. With the main goal, the essential aim to lead all sentient beings out of suffering and its causes. It's with this mind of bodhicitta that we will also continue to study Chandrakirti's commentary on Mula Madhyamika Karika. To give our best to study, contemplate, and meditate on Chandrakirti's words for the welfare of all sentient beings. And without letting go of this motivation, let's then recite the prayer while reflecting on the meaning of each line. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at the merit field. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay. All right. Well, once again, for next week, of course, to remember, always attend if you can, His Holiness Dalai Lama's teachings, where His Holiness very much stresses the need for the mind of enlightenment. Of course, very beautifully, very simply tells us what to do. Emptiness and bodhicitta. Those are the two main practices. And of course, bodhicitta, in preparation for that, we'll continue, of course, our different meditations. But even then, even though we haven't gone through all of them, continuously remind yourself, set an alarm, whatever you need to do to remind yourself every now and then to generate the mind of enlightenment, especially when you have a hard time, when things are difficult, but of course also when you're relaxed. I mean, really anytime you can. First thing in the morning, very important. Then, of course, we've been talking of we're right now meditating on the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others, which starts with focusing on, identifying the self-grasping or self-cherishing attitude. We've done that. Focusing on the disadvantages of cherishing ourselves. And again, we've done that. Hopefully, all of you have done it. And then last time we spoke of the benefits of cherishing others, focusing on examples, like I ask you to focus on someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or anyone else who you believe to be a person who fully cherishes others, doesn't seem to have any self-cherishing, and the kind of effect this person has on yourself, on others, and so forth. But also other aspects, I mean, not just the example of other people, but there's also logical reasoning, which shows us that it makes perfect sense to cherish others, that this is in accordance with reality. It's for our own benefit. So to cherish others, I mean, His Holiness a few days ago, I'm not sure, this was not a teaching, it was more like a get together with a group. I think it was from the Peace Initiative or Peace Institute of the US, group of Generation Change Fellows who had some questions. And in that context, His Holiness talked again, and he's said that before many times. He's spoken about, well, being selfish, but being wisely selfish, so that we have a sense, if we cherish others, if we are compassionate, it benefits others, but really it benefits ourselves. So to become aware, if we really have this self-interest, which we naturally have, I mean, even without self-cherishing, there'll be always the wish to be happy. Well, whether it's just the wish to be happy, or it goes to the degree of selfishness, well, let's be wisely selfish to practice the mind that cherishes others. And as I said, there are many reasons that support why it's important, and that's what I would like you to meditate on. Those are actually also the reasons that help you to equalize self and others. So it actually has both effects on the mind, in that, well, others equal. What does it mean, equal? Well, there are different reasons why they're equal, but the first three reasons are equal in terms of importance. We have a sense we are more important than others. There's an innate sense, which is not based on reality, a sense for my own well-being. It's me. I'm important. I'm the most important person because I'm most important for my own well-being. If I don't look after myself, who will? Kind of idea. But actually, looking only after ourselves is the cause for suffering, versus focusing on the well-being of others is the cause for all happiness. And in that way, understanding that, well, this equalizing, as in like seeing that others are equally important, and in that way, therefore, cherishing others more than ourselves, because others are just more. I mean, we have to spend more energy, put more focus on others just because they're outnumbered. If there was only because they outnumber us, if there was only another person except me, and I'd only have to cherish that one person, it'll be different. But thinking of the numbers of sentient beings, and I'm not just talking about human beings who greatly outnumbers just on this planet, obviously, but even animals and all other living beings, well, whose existence we may have a hard time to believe, but still considering the possibilities. So therefore, put our focus on others and recognizing that it makes sense. So one of the main reasonings that I would like you to do for this week, the main kind of meditation, there are 3 points that I would like you to go through. The first point is from the point of view of physical well-being. The second is from the point of view of mental well-being, mental qualities. And the third aspect is from the point of view of spiritual qualities. Now, taking first the physical well-being, well, our physical well-being, to understand that it's totally dependent on others. And I mean, I know we know that, but the point of the meditation is maybe just put down a few points, just a few points. You put them down, you put the piece of paper in front of you, and you really reflect deeply on that being the case. I mean, whichever way you want to go about it. Maybe just take whatever you need on a daily basis: food, clothing, soap, water, everything that you need in your daily life. I mean, water coming through a pipe and so forth. All this is possible because of others. Of course, directly human beings. And of course, they're usually the ones we have a hard time to cherish. It's easier to cherish certain animals. But to really focus on, well, everything comes from others, the food on our plate. So to really give it some time, how many people are involved and how important is their well-being to continue to provide for us so that we're at least physically well, that we're fed, that we're having clothes to wear, we've got water coming into our house, so we have roads to use, there are cars, I mean, making life more comfortable. Well, that's only possible because of the endless human beings directly and indirectly being involved in making us comfortable. So to really reflect on that, spend some time on that, food, drink, etc. And then, of course, from the point of view of qualities, everything we know, we were born, well, blind basically, but okay, well, we got to see at some point, but we couldn't do anything. We couldn't even sit upright. We couldn't walk. We couldn't talk. We couldn't read and write. None of those things. We don't remember. It was a long time ago when we learned, but it was always due to others. Others taught us everything we know. There's not a single thing that we came up with just on our own. Of course, certain things through thinking about stuff, yes, so we had certain ideas, but it was all due to the input of others. So that's in terms of our mental well-being, mental understanding, of course, of the world we live in. And then spiritually, I mean, if it wasn't for people who need stuff, like needy people, people who are poor and so forth, who ask us for something, we wouldn't be able to practice generosity. If it wasn't for others in general, we couldn't practice refraining from killing, stealing, and so forth. If there are no other sentient beings, well, refraining from killing what? Who? And of course, patience. Well, if it wasn't for obnoxious people, we couldn't practice patience. So to take those three aspects and really spend time, different aspects every day, come up with something new, be creative, but always take those three into consideration. And whenever you conclude in the sense how wonderful there are other sentient beings, how important they are for my well-being, physical, mental, spiritual. Really try to get a sense, first of all, in terms of cherishing others, how important it is to cherish them, to cherish their well-being, because without them, what would I do? So that's for next week. That was a little bit more extensive. Okay. And then next, I still keep receiving answers to this question that I asked. I don't know whether this was in response to the last class or this class, but anyway, Kumpen wrote, she's not there now, I don't see her, but anyway, so Kumpen also gave an answer, and basically she says, she writes that, well, not how understanding what is ultimate truth. Well, why is emptiness ultimate truth, and why is dependent arising not ultimate truth? Well, when we search for something, then what we find is the lack of inherent existence. So with the ultimate analysis, we don't find the lack of independent arising, I guess, the lack of independence. And dependent arising, it's a conventional truth. It's only true from the perspective of the world, and so forth. That's all. I couldn't agree more. Of course, I agree with that. But the question still remains: why is that? So I thought about her response, and I thought just briefly to apply another approach. Maybe that's helpful if what I said earlier wasn't clear yet. And anyway, I may be totally wrong about it, but something that we learned when we studied philosophy is the following, something to understand about emptiness. And many of you will know this, but just in case for those who don't know this, oftentimes we take two types of mind, two types of consciousness. One is the basic misapprehension of reality, the root ignorance. What does the root ignorance do? It has a main object. It has an object, it apprehends. It wrongly apprehends. That's one mind. So think of the root ignorance. And then next to it, think of the wisdom realizing emptiness, the ultimate truth. So compare the two objects. What you'll notice is the root wisdom, it perceives inherent existence, as we know, inherent intrinsic existence. And what is the main object of the mind that realizes emptiness? It's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. Instead of perceiving inherent existence, it perceives the direct opposite, which is the lack of inherent existence, not inherent existence, right? Okay, so ignorance, the root ignorance is the mind that perceives inherent existence. Kunben, this is in response to your response, actually. Yes. Okay, so you have ignorance on one hand, ignorance that perceives inherent existence, and the mind that realizes the ultimate truth. It realizes exactly the opposite, not inherent existence. So, for instance, the I, with regard to the I, the root ignorance apprehends the I exists inherently. And the counterpart to that, in terms of, well, the wisdom, it realizes the I is not inherently existent. So just the exact opposite. All right. Now, if let's say hypothetically, if independent existence, so the I existing independently, were the object of that same ignorance, okay? So while at the same time as the ignorance perceives the I to exist inherently, it also perceives the I to exist independently. If that were the case, then the mind that realizes emptiness would have to realize the I exists independence, right? So the mind that realizes emptiness would have to realize that the I is dependently arisen, because it's the exact opposite. That's right? That makes sense, doesn't it? So it's always the exact opposite. The root apprehension of reality, the root ignorance, perceives the opposite of what the mind realizing emptiness, realizing the ultimate truth, perceives. Okay, and if, as I say, the root ignorance, this root misapprehension of reality, were to perceive independent existence, then independent existence and inherent existence would be the same. Okay, because the mind was just using different words. So if it perceived the I to exist inherently, it would perceive the I to exist independently. Okay, if that were the case, then the mind that realizes emptiness would have to realize, when it realizes the lack of inherent existence of the I, also the lack of independent existence of the I. That would mean that the I existing independence, being dependent, would be emptiness, right? Then it would be, and in that case, everything that applies for emptiness would have to apply for dependent arising. And then it wouldn't be the case that dependent arising is a conventional truth. No, because a mind that realizes emptiness realizes dependent arising. It wouldn't just be true from the perspective of the world. None of that would apply, because it would just be another term. Dependent arising would just be another word describing emptiness, because it's the exact opposite of the object of negation, independent existence, right? But that's not the case. As I'm saying, they are not equal. Inherent existence and independent existence are not equal, because we innately don't hold phenomena to exist independently. In fact, I mean, in some cases, but when it comes to especially the I and everything that we associate with the I may think I'm totally independent of my parents, but that's different. That's also a wrong view, but that's not the kind of wrong view we're talking about here. We're talking about a view that the I is independent of what is part of the I, mind and body. We don't have that view. In fact, we believe there's a connection. As I say, we believe there is a connection. Why? Because we know, we automatically feel when my head hurts, I have a headache. So there's definitely a sense, an innate sense, my body and my mind are connected to my eye. Therefore, there's no sense that the eye is independently existent. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Therefore, if lack of an independent existence were the object of negation, then dependent arising would be the ultimate truth. It had to be. But that's just not the case. It's not the case. So therefore, it is not the root misapprehension. It's not the root ignorance, our main problem. In fact, we perceive dependence, however, in a very inconsistent way. And the connection between inherent existence and dependent existence is that if phenomena existed the way we perceive them as inherently existent, then it would follow they would exist independently, right? That's where this independent existence comes in. But when we realize emptiness, we don't realize the lack of independent existence, all right? That's why we say dependent existence, dependence is not emptiness, okay? It's not the ultimate truth. It would if those two were equal. All right. Anyway, I just wanted to stress that again. So everything Kunbin has said is totally true, but I would still ask, but why? Why is still dependent arising? Why is it not the ultimate view? It's all true that it's not true from the perspective of the world and all that, but why? What is the reason really behind that? And I believe that's the reason. But please keep your objections coming. If you still have objections or questions, please keep them coming. All right, then I'll answer a further question. There's something, and well, Jimmy's got something from last week. So just to cover everything he said. First part I already answered. Yes, I did. And then the mystery, yeah, he talks about the self, and it's really more of a comment. And I've already mentioned it last time, and I said that I really like what he wrote. Despite all the reasonings over the years, every day, it feels as if I am here. There's this I here, seeing, hearing, and so forth, hearing them over there. It's very strong indeed. And that's why I often get angry, attached, afraid, etc. Yeah, well, makes total sense. I think we all know what he's talking about. And then he says he makes the statement, he says, could it be because our mind is not a monolithic single entity, but that there's a whole zoo of minds? And I think that is so important, a whole zoo of minds, or a whole mess of minds, different kinds of minds. Each one wants a go in telling their opinion. That's so true. There's so many different types of awarenesses. So they pop up at different times. I'm not sure, no, not at the same time really, but quickly following each other. So usually they follow one after the other. It's not so much that they happen. Of course, the 5 sense consciousnesses, they're ever present when we're awake, but I'm talking more about the mental consciousness that adds its opinion, the narrator, like always talking and thinking, and it's like this, it's like that. And there's so many different types of mind. And I'm wondering whether we're always aware of them, what we call the subconscious, right? There's certain, I mean, basically when you drive a car, I've mentioned that example before, it's like you're on autopilot. So you can actually have an argument with the person next to you and safely get back home. Why? Because our mind is able to guide us home. If you were, like I said before, if you were to faint, and your mental consciousness, the one that is able to, that's the autopilot, if you like, well, if that wasn't there any longer, you would crash the car. Therefore, you have to have a mind is definitely there, that I'm sitting upright right now. It's due to a consciousness that keeps my body upright, a mental consciousness. I'm not aware of that. But if I were to faint now, I would collapse. So something keeps me upright. A mind is basically responsible mental consciousness, but I'm not aware of it. And in that way, there's so many wrong views and so forth that that keep our sense of reality going. And we may have 5 minutes of thinking about emptiness, maybe half an hour, in the day, we actually meditate on emptiness. And that's all there is. Well, then it's 23 hours and 23 and a half hours. Well, at least when you sleep. But during our dreams, we definitely hold on to inherent existence. And let's say, if you sleep every night 6-7 hours, deduct those. So you've got 18 hours, 17 hours and a half. We reinforce ignorance. Okay. So of course we're up against something really strong and powerful. That's why I keep, and the same of course applies to our self-centered attitude, which is why I continuously stress your meditation on bodhicitta, on compassion, to kind of counteract this force that I just described. But of course, also bring emptiness into your daily life, bring that into your daily life as well. So to go against this zoo of minds, bring your own animal, like an animal of wisdom into the whole zoo and try to find, more of a balance. That'd be hard to have a balance right away, but like a strong counter force. So it's all about repetition. It's all about repetition. It's not about entertainment, it's about repetition. So sometimes we may get a little bit bored of the Dharma. In this wholeness, the Dalai Lama teaches, we may feel, we said that before, I know all that. Well, intellectually knowing that is not why His Holiness is talking about this. His Holiness wants us to internalize that. And if you listen with a mind that internalizes what His Holiness teaches, it's always different, because your mind is in a different state. You've had your most recent memories are different. Your most recent experiences are different. So it's all different from last time. And therefore, it has a different effect on the mind. But what we need to understand is this repetition, doing over and over and over again. And there's so many times in the day when we just, what's the word? Daydream. We're so good at daydreaming. Well, maybe at that point, remember emptiness, remember bodhicitta. That's what His Holiness tells us. Those two, bodhicitta, emptiness. All right. Anyway, emptiness is the word. So next time I'll also answer a question by Sven. He did a very good job, but it was a more recent question, so I haven't gone into it. I'll do it next time. Anyway, let's go back to the text and go back to what we did last time. Now we're on verse 155. Oh, no. No, that's not true. Of course, you're right. Yeah, it's 153. The Miracle Collection constitutes. Yeah, 52 we pretty much did, but I haven't finished it completely. So let me just finish it. I hope I didn't confuse you too much about it. But of course, we're still talking about the collection of parts. Is that an object or not? So the collection of the parts of something. Now, as I said earlier, of course, to find out how something exists, we can only look at the parts of the object. Now, when we discuss this, we discuss the eye and we discuss cars, maybe tables every now and then. But of course, this is now your job to apply this to other things. I mean, maybe more abstract things, but we don't, it's not that cars give us such a hard time. The eye does. The eye is definitely a really important part of it. But there's so much more. I mean, for instance, a problem. If you take a problem, right? We label problem. And then it seems to be in and of itself a problem that kind of hovers over our head like a dark cloud, or an insult. Someone insulted me. Okay, someone says a few words, and again, you can take and do the same analysis. What is the insult? It consists of words spoken by a person, and based on that, I label insult. And suddenly there's this insult, these hurtful words. But if I look for where's the insult within each of the words, Is it the motivation? We may say, oh, it's the motivation and the words, but the motivation is not the insult. The words are not the insult. None of the letters is the insult, right? So in the end, all that happens is, due to these words spoken, they're directed at me. I perceive there's an inherent I. There's something more than merely a labeled I. There's something there. And because there's something more there that's close to my mind, I feel, oh, my happiness is endangered because of those words. As if these words could really destroy me, right? As if someone telling me I'm a nutnik, I'm a friar, or I'm selfish, as if these words would make me that. Okay, so there's this really interesting interaction that's happening. These words, so they were said to me, this insult, and I'm labeling insult. Okay, I wouldn't label if my neighbor were treated like that. I'd be like, wonderful sentence or something if I didn't like my neighbor. So if you have a neighbor I don't like and someone else were to insult my neighbor, I'd be like saying, oh, what such eloquent words or whatever. I would rejoice in those words, possibly label them as insult, but they certainly wouldn't have that dark quality to them. And in fact, I want more of them directed at my neighbor. No, but if they're directed at me, I'm labeling insult like something negative. And it, from that moment onwards, it doesn't seem like I'm labeling it. Now it seems to be kind of like, again, hovering like a dark cloud. It's almost like pressing me down the whole day. I forget about it, a few moments, I totally forget about the whole thing. And then suddenly I remember there's something dark. Ah, I remember. Right? So it's all created in the mind. It's just created. If you look for the insult within those words or anything, nothing was hurt. It's just I allow myself to be hurt because I label a situation a certain way, and then I believe in its inherent existence. Okay? All right. I'm not saying that there's not a conventional insult. Yeah, a merely labeled insult. Yes, sure there is. But nothing of that darkness and solidity that my mind suggests there could be, or that there is. Anyway, so this is how I want you to bring this into your daily life. I mean, doing this analysis and doing some meditation, that's kind of like being a hobby Buddhist. I mean, it's like a really short hobby, not very intense, once a week, an hour and a half. It's not very much for a hobby anyway. You're not even a good hobby Buddhist. I'm joking. I don't know how much you bring it into your life, but I'm saying in case that's all you do, well, you're not even a good hobby Buddhist, because for a hobby you should spend more time. No, but seriously, to bring all this into your daily life, in particular when issues arise, not just the car, not just the table, and not just the I, but also the other person, the insulting person, the obnoxious person, the friar, all of this, take them apart. Where is that? Where is the essence of that? And if we don't find an essence, it's very difficult to see it as something horrible, something to be angry with, something to be attached to be jealous of. There's nothing really to hold on to. And we come to understand it's just a creation of our own mind, giving rise, of course, to all these other afflictive emotions. All right, but we need to do this. We need to first go through some of the reasoning. So the pace right now is extremely slow. It's extremely slow because we're trying to take any possibility into consideration. But if you do this within meditation, you become familiar with it. In the end, it's very speedy. You don't need much time. But we're still at this slow process. All right. Because here it's with the collection, because of course we do associate the car with all its parts. We do associate the I with all its parts. But let's not forget, we're dealing with a view here. We're taking one of the philosophers, the Svatantrika philosophers, who have a view such that they say, all right, phenomena, I and other phenomena, they don't exist the way they appear to us, but they still have to exist inherently. There must be something there. And so as we've been doing the meditations, and if you do them more frequently, I'm convinced, well, depending on how advanced you are. But usually for someone like a beginner like myself, in that case, like if I think about this personally, I always come to the conclusion, but there must be something there. Oh yeah, I take apart the eye, I take apart, but there's no eye and it's like my experience in terms of the way things appear to me doesn't match that analysis. And I'm like, ooh, it's kind of like, but there must be something there. And so the Svatantrika, this philosophy that is right below the Prasangika, the highest view, well, that philosophy suggests that there are labeled things are labeled. Okay, let's say the car is labeled. We call something a car based on its parts. They accept that, that's all right, but there's really some essence there. There must be something there that makes a car and something else. And today I'm actually a little bit prepared, because fortunately I have a young nephew who loves his cars. So I got my nephew. I haven't decided yet which one I prefer, so I've got both here. The example, he definitely likes police cars, as you can see. But the point is here, what I'm trying to say is, well, what would the Svatantrika say? They would say, yes, this is labeled. It's a car. It's labeled car, police car, on the basis of its parts. But there must be something truly there. There must be something inherent, not truly, but inherently, there must be some essence that makes this object a car. That makes this object a car versus, well, this is a prisoner transport, I've been told, a prisoner van, and this is just a police car. So there's a difference between the two. And they're all made of subtle atoms. They're all basically are like a collection of different atoms. But the Svatantrika would argue that there still is a difference between those two, because otherwise they wouldn't look different. They wouldn't have different functions. There wouldn't be different phenomena. So there must be something there. And that's what they describe the inherent existence of this object, something that you can find. And this is where the main difference comes in. So they say, okay, this is labeled. It's a collection of different parts coming together. And that's called a car. They do accept that. I say even some of the other schools accept that. But they say there's something here. When you look for this particular object, some essence, you'll find it. All right. Now, what is it that they say you find? And that's the difficulty. And here, there are some alternatives. All the parts, some of the parts, something separate? No. Because innately, we don't feel, we had those verses before, we don't feel innately that there's an inherent car that exists separate from its parts, independently of its parts. Remember, it's that innately, we don't have that sense. So it's got to do with the parts. It's got to do with the parts themselves. All right. Each of the parts, it doesn't make sense. Come on, is it the flashing light? Is it the wheels? Is it the steering wheel? Is it the engine? Oh, it's got no engine, but never mind. I think just visualize it had an engine. Oh, okay. So any of these parts, it couldn't be the car. Now, the one possibility that we may feel most comfortable with is the collection of its parts. Now, here, the argument we had before with the collection, well, if you were to take apart the car, right, I can actually take apart some bits, but I don't want to go too far because my nephew wouldn't forgive me for doing that. So therefore, if I take it apart, if I were to totally take it apart, then in the end, well, I'd have a collection of parts, but I wouldn't have a car. We already went through that. But let's take it further. I've also mentioned this before. Let's take off the roof, right? So a police car with a blue light. Okay, this is a police car with a blue light, and I'm holding on to this. Okay, I'm holding on to it. Now I have a police car with a blue light, and now I don't have a police car with a blue light, right? I'm holding on to the same thing, but now there is a police car with a blue light, and then now there isn't one. Okay, although I'm still holding on to the same thing. And so the question would be, well, how can that be? How can that be that although you hold on to the same thing, in one moment you have a car, if you like, a proper police car, and the next moment you don't. All right. Okay, so that is a question that may arise, but let's take it further. If we still insist, okay, it's the collection of the parts that make this a car. It's a collection of the parts that make this a car. Now, if I look for the car, therefore, what I find is the collection of the parts, and therefore I can say there is a car. Now, the car, if I have a collection of parts, first of all, what is the collection? I've already mentioned it last time. What is a collection anyway? Is it all the individual parts put together? Well, then the collection would be many parts, right? And the collection is just one. I just talk about a collection. So all the parts put together in a certain way, that would be many, many parts. But all right, that's already a little bit odd. But then we say it's the collection of the car. And the argument here is, how can the collection of the parts be a collection of the car? Doesn't that imply that there's a difference between the car and the collection of the parts, in that one is the whole, the car, and the collection of the parts are the parts? You see, like this relationship between a whole, W-H-O-L-E, the whole, or the part bearer or part possessor, as it would be called in Tibetan. So in order to have parts of something, I must have some part bearer. I must have a whole for those parts to be there. Now we say the car is the whole, and the parts are the parts of that whole, of that car. But the collection of the parts, aren't they also part of the car? Right? They're the collection of the car. So if we say that the car is the collection of the part, here, Chandrakirti argues, well, in verse 152, since there can be no parts without the bearer of the parts, so it could be, therefore, the car cannot have a bearer of parts. So there can be no parts without the bearer of the parts. And then now implied in this third line is, well, then the collection of the parts cannot be the car, because the car is the whole, and the collection of the parts, they belong to the car. They're part of the car, right? So how can I put it? It's like there's this relationship between any phenomenon. Any phenomenon must have parts. Whatever exists has parts. So parts doesn't necessarily mean physical parts. It can also mean attributes, qualities, characteristics. Now, at the very least, everything that exists has the characteristic of existing, okay, of being permanent or impermanent. Now, it's easier with physical objects that have actual physical parts. So in this case here, we always talk of an object in terms of its parts. We cannot talk of it separately. For instance, if I ask you to point at the car, you point at a part. When I ask you, do you see the car? You always see a part of the car, all right? Pointing at it, touching it, sitting in it, whatever you do with the car, what it comes down to is always you're doing something with a part of it, okay? So there's just no way around it. It's always, when I say anything about the car, explain it to me, you explain a part. You explain something other than the car. Talk about it, explain it, do anything with it. It's always going to be with a part of it. And we would always say there is the whole on one hand, that's the car, and then that was just part of the car, okay? So the collection is actually a part of the car. The collection of the parts, it means all parts together. And if each of these parts is a part of the car, how could all of them not be a part of the car? And if all of them, if the collection is a part of the car, and the car is also the collection, what is the whole and where are the parts, right? How can you say that the collection of the part is the car? Then the collection of the parts would be both its parts and the whole. But how can it be something its own parts and at the same time be the part bearer? And that doesn't work. This relationship between owner and owning something, being a whole and having parts, they're always different phenomena. You don't own yourself. We may talk like that, but it's like I own myself. It doesn't make sense. They always have to be separate. So here the argument is it doesn't make sense. There are no parts without the bearer of the parts. So if the collection of parts were the car, then you wouldn't have a whole because the collection is the parts. And if you were to say the same about the shape, if you were to say, well, the shape of the car is the car, well, then the shape alone, the problem is that it doesn't make sense. The shape alone, that's not the whole. It's again a part of the car. How can you say that something that is actually a part of the car, whether it's the shape or whether it's the collection of parts, how can that be the whole that is the part bearer, which is the car itself? That's his argument here. So his argument is very strongly, we do talk about an object as like the whole and its parts. We're very clear about there being a difference. But if you, Svatantrika, argue that, yes, you find something that is the car, that's the essence of the car, there's something there that's the essence of the car, you end up always finding a part of it. You never find the whole that is the car. Okay, so the collection certainly can't be it, and the shape can't be it. All right, I hope that's clear. So this is verse 152. But included in this verse are other ideas as well, something that comes to mind. So when we distinguish between parts and the whole and the part bearer, and we still believe phenomena exist inherently, so just get in touch with that mind, that sense there's something like overarching, there's something there, as if there was something that covers all its parts, and that's what we call the car. Not just labeled, but really something there. I'll ask you one question. This is something that comes up in the debate, for instance. All right. I'll ask you, let's take a cake, something as simple as a cake. All right. If you take, for instance, we've had this idea with a car, if you take it apart, a disassembled car, do you still have a car? The answer is no. Well, what about a cake? You have a round sponge cake or whatever, some kind of some kind of cake, fruit cake or whatever. So chocolate cake, think you have this chocolate cake and you cut it into 12 pieces. When you cut it into 12 pieces, do you still have a cake or not? Well, let's say, yeah. If they're still together on that plate, okay. If they're put on individual on the individual plates, well, do you still have a cake or not? Do you still have a piece of cake? Okay, we had that discussion last time too. If you disassemble a car, okay, you have parts. You say you have parts, but parts of what? There's no longer a car. So what are the parts of? And again, I'm only doing that because there's a sense, there's this inherent car over there, a sense such that, well, it even survives the disassemblance. It would even if you were to take it, there's still something there. So we continue to think that there's a car there because we continuously call it the part of the car. Let's say the car gets smashed. I throw it in the fire, and all I'm left with is this little blue, like this flashlight, right? It even flashes, but I'm not going to switch it on because it doesn't switch off. I had to take off the battery just before class. So anyway, this blue light, well, is it a part of the car? We would usually say yes, but what car? There is no car. How can it be a part of a car when there's no car? So strictly speaking, that's quite difficult. I mean, there's some problem with the way we use language. It seems there's something lingering. The car is lingering because I still have a part of it. But strictly speaking, there's no part of the car. But let me continue with this cake. So never mind, you can still call it a piece of cake, but when you put it onto 12 different plates, Okay, let's say you still have a piece there. Now, my question would be, is this cake, when it's complete, is it dependent on all 12 pieces? The answer is yes, right? To be a complete cake, it needs all 12 pieces, right? Okay. But when you have these 12 pieces and you remove one, it's no longer a cake, right? If you remove one, you have no longer a whole cake. So whether it's a whole cake or not, it's really just dependent on one piece. It's not dependent on 12 pieces. It's dependent on one piece, right? Isn't that interesting? Actually, we say the cake is dependent on all 12 pieces. So it needs all of them to be a cake. I would argue, no, it's only one. You take one out and it's gone. So whether it's a cake or not, it depends on just one cake. These are just kind of like games that confuse us, not so much because we have a sense, well, it's merely labeled and so forth. It's more that we have a sense there's really a cake, there's really something there. And the fact that, well, yeah, we say it's 12 pieces make up a cake, but labeling it a cake or not, that's different, right? So another example, I've used that before actually in another class. I'm not sure in this class, but previously we talked about a cake and its pieces. Now take time. Take any period in time. We talk about 1 year, okay? 1 year. 1 year is made up of 12 months. To have 1 year, you need 12 months. But if you take away 1 month, right? 1 month, let's say one second. 1 second is taken away. You no longer have 1 year, right? So this year has only lasted 1 second. Because 1 second you had a whole year and a second later, no longer a whole year. So isn't that your whole year has only lasted for 1 second? Because now it's no longer a whole year. The whole year is gone and it lasted. So think about this. These are ideas. Okay, so those two with the cake. You removed only one cake. Sorry, you only removed one piece. And now you're no longer left with a complete cake. So all you needed to remove was this one piece, and now it's no longer a whole cake. That means whether it's a cake or not is dependent on that one piece. But on the other hand, we say it's dependent on 12 pieces. Isn't that contradictory? And again, with the time, if you take however many seconds 1 year has, right? We say it's complete. I don't know if anyone wants to do the math of I don't know how many millions of seconds make up 1 year. But just remove 1 second and it's no longer a year. So within 1 second, you no longer have a year. How is that possible? Okay. So just some of these arguments, we use them in the debate. We use them in the debate, kind of like it's hard to answer, but think about this. Think about this, our sense of something being very concretely there. How could that apparent contradiction take place? So this is something to challenge you throughout this week. And I'll address it again next time. But anyways, just briefly. But now to continue, this part, I hope it's clear what I just said. So however confusing this is, this should be confusing. We should really see contradictions in things because it points out to us how we have this contradictory perception of things. I mean, if we were in accordance with reality, with all our minds being in accordance with reality, that contradiction wouldn't arise. Okay, so it's only because of our misapprehension of reality that we meet here head on. All right, so now let's go back to the verses just to cover a little bit. And now the shape. The shape is also quite interesting. Now, I'm taking the following verses. Interesting, I'm saying interesting, not so much about, of course, we have this argument, maybe the car is its shapes. Okay, I mean, in terms of a car, it's got a unique shape, and we could actually get the sense that, well, the shape with all the parts having come together in a certain way, and that unique shape, that is the car. So if you have a uniquely shaped vase or a uniquely shaped other object, there may be a sense, oh, that's really the essence of this vase. But even without doing that, we've analyzed what is the car, what makes the car a car. But what about the shape of the car? Does the shape of the car exist inherently? And without using the following argument that comes in verse 153 and 154, without using that argument as of saying the shape is the car. No, just analyzing what is the shape of the car, like using that as our basis, just as we used the car previously. So does the shape exist inherently or not? What is this shape that appears so clearly? What is it? We analyze that. We should analyze anything about any object, its function, its activity. Okay, we haven't really gone into activities yet. So the activity of walking, what makes the activity of walking? What makes the activity of speaking? I mean, they're just moments based on that, moments of sounds when I'm speaking. Based on that, I'm labeling speaking. All right, without any of these parts being the speech. So here, let's take the shape. In verse 153, it says, for you, is it 53 already? Yes. For you, just as shapes exist previously in each of the parts. So what is he saying? For you, Svatantrika here, who believe in inherent existence, as we do too. So great, we can kind of feel for them. They also say things are labeled. Yeah, okay, I mean, any teaching, when you give a teaching to a newcomer on the Dharma and you say the car is labeled, they will agree. No problem, it's easy, it's not that difficult, it's to call a car. Great, that's not the difficult part. But then to say it's just called a car and nothing more, that's where it becomes difficult, right? Doesn't exist inherently. So we're just in tune with the Svatantrika here. And what does Chandrakirti say to the Svatantrika? For you, just as shapes exist previously in each of the parts. Yes, before you assembled the car, okay? Before it was ever a car, it was disassembled, with all these parts in the factory or wherever. And the shape of this car, there were shapes before, right? Each of the parts had a shape and they existed previously in each part, okay? So what is the shape? What is the shape of this car? Again, the collection, it's all of the parts together. Really, we have to look for what is the shape of this car? We have to look for it among its parts. So we look for the shapes in each part. So before the car was assembled, you had the shape of each of those parts. Okay. If these very shapes, the same, so the shapes of each part, the shape of this part, the shape of this part, here the whatever, here it is, of the what do you call that, whatever. Anyway, this part, the shape of the tires and so forth. So if all these parts, so the shape of those parts existed before the car was put together. Yes. Then he argues, well, if the shape of this car, if the summary of the shapes of this car were the shape of the car now, of the summary of each shape were to make the shape of this car, it kind of feels right, doesn't it? So all the summary of the shapes of each part, that makes the summary of the car. Well, then he says, just as there is no car in the unassembled parts, right? When you unassemble it, well, you should say that there is no shape now. There's no shape now because you have the same shape as before. The same parts. The shape of the parts hasn't changed after you put them together. So if the summary of the parts of the shape, if the summary of the shape of the part, if the shape of this part here, of this part, and the shape of this part, if the summary of all these shapes were the shape of the car now, well, previously when the car was not assembled, you had all these shapes, right? You had all these shapes, they were there. But just as you didn't have a car then, you don't have a car now then. You can argue in that way, right? You could argue if these very shapes were to persist, were to continue to exist before the car was assembled and now as the car is assembled, if it continues on, so the shape is still there before the car was put together and now, well, just as before there was no car, when the parts were not assembled, there is no car now. And if there's no car now, if there's no before, well, just as there's no chariot in the unassembled parts, then there is also no, just as there's no car in the unassembled parts, there's no chariot right now, true, right? So it would be the same, just as previously. I'm not sure, I'm watching your faces, I don't see everyone's face, but I see a little bit of confusion. Yes, there's a little bit of confusion. So, all right, what he's saying here with verse, maybe you just read the commentary, maybe it's easier that way. So for you, Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, just as shapes exist in each of the individual chariot parts or car parts, such as the wheels, this roof and so forth, previously, before being assembled, if these very shapes that previously existed were to later persist, were to continue to exist, which they do, when the car is now perceived or put together, then just as there is no chariot before, as there was no car before the parts were put together, now there's also no chariot. There should also not be chariot. Nothing has changed except that they were put together, right? So the shape, if the car were the shape, if the car were the shape of the car, previously the shape of each part existed. Yeah, maybe I didn't stress that enough. He's here saying that the shape of the car is the car. Okay, so previously before assembling the car parts, you had the shape of each part, but you didn't have a car. Now when it's assembled, why would you have a car now? You have just the individual shapes, but no car yet. That's his argument here. Anyway, even if it's not clear yet, you may want to read the commentary by Lama Tsongkhapa. Maybe that makes it a little bit clearer. And I've already said so much that I'm worried I'm confusing you even more. But to just simply analyze it, what is the shape really of this car? If you take it apart, these individual parts, that's not the shape. And so if you put it together, what is there other than the merely labeled shape? Okay, so therefore, the shape itself cannot be the car because the shape itself existed previously in all its parts, but there was no car at that time. Now the car is put together. Why would you say you have a car now? Because none of the parts that you had previously, the shape is the same. The shape of the parts when they were unassembled is the same. So if you didn't have a car then, why would you have a car now? That's really what he's saying. But then he goes on to say, okay, so if you say, what is the shape of the car? Is it the one before the parts were put together or afterwards? Well, in the second case, if within the chariot, that is right here and now. Okay, that's verse 154. If within the chariot, that is right here and now, the wheels and so on have acquired different shapes, this fact would have been perceived, but it's not the case. So there's no new shape there either. So shape alone cannot be the chariot, cannot be the car. All right. Now, that was a little bit confusing, but I think it was more confusing because I didn't explain it in a clear enough way. So let me just summarize, and hopefully that brings it back together because Chandrakirti is very clear. So just to summarize, just putting it back together. We believe phenomena exist in and of themselves and that we will find something from the side of the object. And the most likely scenario would be that what we find is the collection of the parts of the car, for instance. However, well, just the collection is not enough. At least it has to be assembled. They have to be assembled. And on top of that, if you were to disassemble the car, well, do you still have parts? Do you have parts of what? to have parts, you need to have a whole, but there's no longer a whole. Okay, that's one aspect. And then likewise, even before you disassemble, before you dismantle the car, so the car itself, if you say the collection of the parts is the car itself, well, the car itself is the part bearer, it's the whole, but the collection of the part is a part of the car. How can you say the car is the collection when the collection is a part of the car? Therefore, the car cannot be the collection because the car is the whole. It's that which we call the whole. And the collection is just a part of it. The same applies to the shape. How can you say the shape is the car? The unique shape, if you say that's the car. Well, how could that be the car? Again, because it's just a part of the car. The car is the whole. How can you say the car is a part of itself? That doesn't make sense. So none of those two make sense. Then with regard to the shape, what he says here, the argument of the shape, if the car were the shape, if the car were its own shape, then let's take those 2 times before the car was assembled and afterwards. Because actually, in terms of the shape you had previously and afterwards, well, where do you look for the shape of the car? Among its parts. But the shape of the parts hasn't changed. The shape of the parts before the car was assembled and after it was assembled is the same. So if you say the car is its shape, well, when you didn't assemble the parts, you had the same shape as when you assemble the parts. The shape of the individual parts hasn't changed. So then you could still argue, well, since the shape hasn't changed and before you assembled the parts, you didn't have a car, well, then you wouldn't have a car now either. That would actually be the logic. All right. And furthermore, he argues in the other verse, if you say, oh, but these different parts, when they were assembled, they did take on a different shape, then you would argue, well, I would have seen that. This part still looks the same. The kind of roof part still looks the same. This part still looks the same. So if really any of the parts had shifted its shape, I would have perceived that, but it didn't happen. That's all he's saying, right? So I apologize. I think I've just confused you. Really, it's pretty straightforward with what he said. All right. Okay. Let's do some meditation on that. Yeah, let's meditate exactly on these 3 verses. And starting again with some breathing meditation. And especially today, it's important just let go of any confusion, any mental stress. And just focus on your breath for a few moments. Now, before we start the analysis, try to get in touch with your ordinary sense of reality. That there is an I, that appears to the mind as if not merely labeled. And a car. It seems to exist as if findable. As a car among its parts. As if there was some inherent carness that exists beyond labeling. So if we analyze the way this car, for instance, appears to us, we have to analyze its parts. Is that findable car as it appears to us? An individual part? Or is it the collection of parts? Since to have a car, you need all the parts, it seems to make much more sense that the car, if it was findable, would be the collection of parts. Unless we were to say it existed separate from its car, from its parts, which would mean you can remove the parts and still have a car. let's return to the possibility of the collection of all the parts that make up the car is the car, the inherent car. Well, then, if you disassemble, if you dismantle the car, do you still have parts? Do you still have parts of the car? Can you have parts of a car without the car? But even without dismantling the car, if all the parts of the collection of parts is the car, then the car would be a part of itself and the whole at the same time. Because the collection is actually a part of the car. And not the whole. In other words, Chandrakirti argues that it doesn't make sense that the collection is the car, since that would mean you only have parts of a car, but no whole or part bearer. But someone else may argue that the shape, the unique shape particular car. That is the inherent findable car as it appears to our mind. If that were the case, well, the unique shape of the car can only be found among the shape of each of its individual parts. The shape of the door, the doors, shape of the engine, the shape of the roof, steering wheel, the shape of the entire car can only be found among the shape of the individual parts. Yet the shape of the individual parts, whether the parts are assembled or not, they're the same. None of the shapes or the shape of each individual parts has changed. If the shape of the car is the car, and that shape is found within the individual parts, there should be a car before the car was assembled, before the parts were assembled. Or as Chandakirti puts it, if before the individual parts are assembled, you have the shape of each individual part, but no car, why would you have a car when the parts are assembled? since the shape of each individual part hasn't changed from before. The only other possibility would be that the shape of the individual parts has changed after the individual parts were assembled. But as Chandrakitty says, someone would have perceived that. But that just didn't happen. No one perceived it. Since such a shape, such a change of shape didn't take place. As to conclude, even though the car appears to exist in and of itself, findable among its parts, the previous analysis has shown us car simply can't be found. But since it does exist, since we can drive in it, use it, it is merely labeled on the basis of its parts. Which is also the case for I and other. Problem, insult, and so forth. They all exist, but only as labeled on the basis of their parts. Which in turn also merely labeled on their parts, and so forth. And now leave aside this analytical meditation and apply single-pointed meditation by focusing on whatever insight you've reached, whatever conclusion you've come to. Single-pointedly just focus on that feeling and that insight. And allow for it to internalize it further. And now to dedicate all the virtue, the positive potential we've accumulated as a group to meditate on emptiness, as instructed by Chandakirti. By this virtue, may we be able to generate the wisdom that realizes emptiness, that removes our misapprehension and all its imprints, so that we are able to actualize our fullest potential in the form of the enlightenment of a Buddha, for the welfare of each and every sentient being. May our virtue also cause our great lamas, great spiritual masters like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the other great masters live a very long and healthy life and continue to teach the Dharma. And due to our interconnectedness with everyone else around us, may our virtue bring more peace to the minds of the beings in this world. Help those who are sick, like Tali Lubin, physically sick, those who are mentally sick, who are imprisoned, suffer from addiction, and so forth. And of course, as described by Shantideva in his dedication prayer, may all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And most importantly, for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you. All right, we've gone a little bit more than the 15 minutes that I had planned. My apologies for that. Anyway, please remember what I said at the beginning of our class today. So, of course, bodhicitta, again and again, generate the mind of enlightenment, but your main focus should also be on the practice, of course, what we learned today, apply it to problems, insults, and so forth. But in terms of generating the mind of enlightenment, to remember why it makes sense to cherish other sentient beings, their welfare being so important for our physical welfare, for our mental welfare in the form of, well, education, understanding, just worldly knowledge, and of course on the spiritual level in terms of generosity, patience, etc. All right, that's it for today. And then next week we'll meet again as today. So it may take a few times. I almost forgot, to be honest. I remembered around 4 o'clock. So just remember, we'll start an hour earlier. All right, have a great week.
Thank you, Geshe. So I'd like to
Thank you.
to remind you all that we start every Sunday an hour earlier, 7 o'clock Israel time, 6 o'clock in Germany, midday, I believe, in New York, Snehi, right? I believe so. Whatever.
At noon.
2 p.m.
12 p.m. for us.
So an hour earlier, anyway. Take care. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Geshe.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Laila Tov.
Dankeschön, gute Nacht.
Have a leaky.